Today is October 8th, 2019. On this date, a diverse group of women and activists came together, including members of Women's Liberation Front, in front of the Supreme Court in order to rally around women's rights and girls' rights, as well as to speak about the harms of gender identity ideology. My name is Corrina, and I am a member of WOLF, as well as a founding member of the Pacific Northwest chapter. And I am joined here today by a panel of lesbians for Lesbians on Chairs. Thank you all for being here with me today. I would like to first introduce Jocelyn Macdonald. She is an organizer and activist and writer, contributing writer and assistant editor at After Ellen, which is a premier, is the web's premier lesbian news and culture site. Thank you for being here. We also have Linda Bellos. She is a lesbian, radical feminist, She is an out, proud African lesbian feminist from the UK.
And Jewish.
And Jewish, thank you. Thank you for being here, all the way from the UK.
Thank you.
And then we also have Marian Rutigliano, who is a physician and research scientist, lesbian and radical feminist for the past 50 years. Thank you all for coming. So I wanted to, first off, just kind of ask all of you, actually I'll go ahead and just present what format this is going to be in. So I'll just present a question or idea, and then it doesn't need to be in any particular order, but any of you can answer, and then once it feels like that's sort of been answered out, then we'll move on to the next thing. And then after we're all done with that, we may open things up to discussion. So my first question for all of you is, what types of issues have you been specifically focused on within the lesbian community specifically, but also the more general radical feminist community?
Depending how far you want to go back, but
you can go as far back as you like.
One of my first issues was the need to be out. The need to, I don't mean with every discussion you say, well, as a lesbian, that horrible, I don't like that at all, but lots of work has been done by lesbians and often forgotten or sidelined, or other non-lesbians take credit for the work that's been done. So I think it's quite important that we acknowledge we're here, that we play an active part. I don't, of course, mean all lesbians any more than all heterosexual women do all things, but we have been in societies for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and we are only now standing up and saying who we are.
Absolutely.
My feminist organizing hasn't been lesbian specific until recently. I've mostly focused on things that are general women's liberation issues and bring my lesbian self to them. But I started writing about lesbian issues with a couple articles that were on Feminist Current, and then I became a regular contributor to After Ellen. And so when I'm not writing about lesbian issues, my lesbian activism is just having dinner parties and consciousness raising and banjo playing at my house and just bringing women together.
Can you just briefly describe what Feminist Current is for anyone watching who might not know?
Feminist Current is a Canadian-based feminist website, which is probably the highest traffic feminist website in the English-speaking world.
Wonderful, thank you.
For me, it's just about lesbian by definition. I mean, prioritize women, like all the time in every facet of life. Prioritize women. And that means that we can work with women who aren't lesbians on things that prioritize women. But it means that in our personal lives, we prioritize each other, we prioritize women, and we meet as women who love women. And I know, because I've just been out for a long time, and I remember what it was like, that if women meet with only women repeatedly, relentlessly, that things happen and ideas change, and the propensity to prioritize women becomes more and more powerful so that it becomes unstoppable. And that's what the world who does not prioritize women is afraid of.
Well, thank you for all of those wonderful answers. So moving on, I wanted to ask, how do you think the radical feminist and lesbian communities could be more inclusive to Black and brown women, women with disabilities, working class women, and other women who have been historically marginalized?
I think that they should tell us what we need to do that, and we should be listening to it. I don't, I know that the only basis for comparison I have is like, I know that even that men who even say that, well, I think that women are equal. I want to include women. Whatever they say, that they're still men, and they're still, they still are part of patriarchy, and they still are part of men dominating women, and they have no idea. And what I want to tell them as a woman is, shut up and listen, and leave us a space to do our own thing and support us in the way we tell you we really need you to support us. All I can think of, because I'm not a woman of color, all I can think of is I should shut up and listen, and give Black women, women of color, the space to do what they need to do and support them in the way that they tell me they ought to be supported.
And I'm inclined to say that I'm sorry that some of the movements of Black women, certainly in Britain where I live, have faded as the white women's movement has faded. Feminism has faded. And as we are continuing to think about, and I hope to act on our thoughts about reviving feminism, that we do so considering ourselves to be about all women. And if women in this room don't think that feminism is about all women, then they should shut up and go on.
I would like to add practical things that have worked in organizing that I've been a part of, and that is show up with your lesbian self to things that are already in place and being run by women of color, and find ways to be of service and helpful. That goes a long way. Another thing that's really practical is providing childcare. A lot of women can't participate in things regularly because they don't have childcare, or they can't bring their children to stuff. Find ways that children can be entertained, or find individuals who will watch children. Locate your meetings close to public transit. That is just accessible, increases accessibility for everyone, and make things low cost. Choose venues that are free or low cost, or just think about the accessibility of everyone and bring it down to the lowest common denominator.
It sounded like you had something additional to add, Linda.
No, don't worry about it. I think that we need to be considering Black women, and I'm using Black in its political context, are as varied as white women are. We are old, we are young, we are poor, we are rich, and that goes for white women. If we want to see an inclusive women's liberation movement, we should be appealing to all women of all classes, of all ethnicities, of all religions and beliefs, with disabilities, without disabilities, that it's not, we shouldn't be thinking in terms of compartments and boxes to tick, but when we think about women, it has to be the diversity of women. So when we're in the United States of America, it's going to be women who come from a whole range of places, different to the country that I live in and come from, Britain, where the numbers of and diversity of women will be different. Feminism, the liberation of women, has to be about the liberation of all women. and all women need to be participating in the struggles for liberation. So I guess learning some of the skills and knowledge and experience that we've gained from other aspects of our lives. The women organising and creating and propelling the women's liberation movement isn't really much different to any other activity that we might be engaged in to take forward equality and justice in this world.
Well, thank you. Did any of you have anything else to add to that? Okay. So I wanted to ask about strategies. What do you think are some of the best strategies to get the word out about radical feminism to, women in general, but especially young women who might not even realize that is a thing?
Communicating. To actually just being confident out there speaking. Letting it be known we are out and proud feminists, and when we are lesbians we should say we're out and proud lesbian feminists. We should also have activities that are going on that we are able to invite. I mean, just saying that you're a feminist to another woman is not, I think, sufficient. We need to be doing something that takes forward the liberation of women.
Like today?
Yes, definitely like today. And other things that we are doing and we are thinking about. When we're thinking about the liberation of women, we need to be certain about the liberation of women from what? I would be inclined to say men's oppression. What are we doing? What are we encouraging other women to do? What are they proposing so that we're inclusive and we're not just the old guard going to give orders to the younger guard, who will be of multiple ages, remember. They're not all young. There are feminists who become feminists when they're in their 60s or 70s or 80s or even their 90s. And it happens, and we should be celebrating that, seeking to do it, and therefore being conscious of our need to ensure that the message of feminism is out there for all women. I also will be spending some of my time seeking to persuade, convey to men the actions they need to take to reduce their oppression of women. I say reduce because I don't ever believe a man who tells me he is free from oppression of women. I certainly won't hold on my breath on it, but I do think that men have to learn, rather than come and, what I have seen them do is come and get into our space because they want to know something. I want them to go away. But there are things they should do, including consciousness raising. Men need to do consciousness raising.
Thank you.
I was going to talk about women doing consciousness raising, which used to be, which was profoundly, life-changing for a lot of women, and the original CR groups, it was a lot of heterosexual women, but spaces for lesbians to feel what it's, to see the difference. It would seem axiomatic that, that heterosexual women would have a very tough time, having to admit that what they have no choice about in terms of relationships and lifestyles is really oppressive. But it should also seem axiomatic that lesbians should find that easy to do because, we spend some of our lives, at least in separatism, in terms of relationships and in terms of, if we have our choice, maybe in terms of socializing even. And if there are more and more spaces and places for lesbians to strictly be with other lesbians, like all the time, doesn't have to be off on a commune in the middle of wherever. It can just be in a place where a lot of lesbians live in close proximity, where there are lesbian businesses, where all your socializing is with lesbians, because that's who's there and that's who's in your community, and that's who you enjoy being with, and to see what a difference it makes. Every woman knows that. You can be in a group of women and one man walks in and every woman knows that the vibe is suddenly different.
Mm-hmm.
Completely different. and you know, the more you experience only lesbian spaces, the more you are just really keyed into, oh my God, this is so much better. So if we can provide spaces, and that means, you know, if you have an apartment that's big enough for, you know, for people to socialize, or a house or whatever, or land, or any place that's big enough for, you know, a bunch of lesbians to just get together and lesbian, it really can be life-changing, because the difference then just becomes very, very obvious, and there's a disturbance in the lesbian force all of a sudden when you're in spaces that are not all lesbian. So the more we can provide that, I mean, that's a, you know, long-term strategy.
I would like to mention to our viewers that on this day, lesbian became a verb. Did you have something to add to
Yeah,
that,
well,
Nelson?
I think one thing about your question that I heard was that this aspect of how do we get the word out about radical feminists to people who haven't heard of it before. And I think that, kind of to add to what both of you were saying regarding being out as a radical feminist and about consciousness raising with other women, is to talk about your feminist politics as a matter of course in your normal life. So I am a motorcyclist and a musician, and I always find myself encountering normies in the techno world or in the motorcycle world who've never thought about porn culture, or they've never been confronted by the reality of what gender identity really means. And so every time I hear somebody use a slur against women, I interrupt that. Or every time I think someone, I think I could slip a radical feminist talking point into a conversation, even if it doesn't seem relevant, I'll find a way to connect the dots. And I feel like an evangelical for radical feminism, and I feel like it works amazingly well sometimes, because so many normies who've never heard of this before understand intuitively that everything we're saying is honest, and that everything we're saying is in alignment with women being free and men not being an oppressor class. And so if you can just like twist that knob for people, then they're like, oh yeah, I guess yeah, like porn's not empowering. Like why did I think that?
All great points, thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else to add to that particular question? I wanted to just ask one last question, and then we'll probably open things up to a general discussion. What do you think are the biggest obstacles that radical feminists and lesbians face as communities? I know that's a really big one, so it can take a second.
Meeting space is one. Opportunity to meet with each other. So communal, collective, community activities. I came out in, when was it, late 1970s, and there were at that time, in the parts of England I lived in, spaces for lesbians, where it was known lesbians gathered to socialise. Wow. And I here we are, sort of 40 years later, and those places that have not been replaced by new, more modern places. There are no places for lesbians to socialise. Indeed, in general, it seems to me that there's not many places for socialist feminists, or any groups of feminists to socialise, to come together, to meet, in terms of whether it's in political parties, merely a social activity. There aren't places, as though we are simply looking at the mirror of our what are those modern things called?
Our cell phones?
Yeah, that's the ones. Looking at our cell phones and not looking around us. And I think we maybe need to do both. It isn't either or, but it's certainly we need to be communicating with each other, arguing, discussing, discoursing with each other
Face to
more.
face.
Yeah,
Not just on Facebook.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
I think a real lack of critical thinking, which I think is probably fueled by, postmodernism kind of taking over education and public discourse. Nobody even knows. People think radical feminism, the radical means extreme. It doesn't. It means getting to the root of things. And nobody knows anymore that comes from long division, with the radical, you're taking the square root. And that's where that comes from. And that may be just a very obscure mathematical fact, but it's something that people used to learn in third grade. But it is, I think, reflective of just not understanding that words have meanings, not believing anymore that there is objective reality outside of oneself, and I think people just don't understand A, what radical feminism means, and B, have a misperception because of postmodernism that feminism now is all about just equality and don't really understand liberation. And I think patriarchy, the male juggernaut has been very, very successful at convincing women that all they need to be is equal. I don't want to be equal because I don't want to step down like that. So I don't want to be equal to men. I want them to maybe be equal to me. But I think it's just not understanding terminology, and I think it's not understanding what liberation really means. And I think a lot of this is just driven by male sexuality and male socialization now being so successfully infested and infiltrated into all of our thought systems, along with just this postmodernism, nothing really has any meaning. That's just made it very, very difficult to communicate. And I'm not sure how to overcome that.
I think that one of the biggest threats is just that individual women are being hunted for their thought crimes, and women are being targeted in areas that are irrelevant to feminism. Women who are working for an organization that's not related to feminism, for instance, could be fired for something that they said on Twitter. And when other women see individual women being brought down for minor thought crimes or major thought crimes, whatever, women become afraid to be honest and to speak truth, and they therefore are accepting the compelled speech that men can be women, or that pornography is empowering, or that sex can be work, or that gender can be liberating. All of these things that we know to be falsehoods, women will try to somehow make work in their lives because they see that individual women are being brought down in ways that are ruining their careers or threatening their families or putting them in physical danger. So women are afraid for a reason. This fear is justified. But the solution to it has to be to stick our necks out. We have to have a critical mass of women who are not willing to lie. And yeah, it takes bravery.
It does, and you're also brave for being here. I realized as we were all answering that question that I probably don't want to end this part of the discussion on any sort of a kind of downer note. So what do you yes, let's all have a moment to smile, and what do you all see as hope for radical feminists and lesbians? What do you see any sort of kind of light at the end of the tunnel, or any sort of positivity or silver lining coming from what's going on right now in the world for women and girls?
Give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves, and they are. No, I'm serious. the excesses are becoming so barbaric, ludicrous, I mean, off the wall, that, I mean, it's, I hope it won't be sooner or later, and I hope it's gonna be way sooner than later. People are just gonna say, this is nuts. And I think that's starting to happen. It's
Women
just
are
like,
saying
you
that
know,
for
a
sure.
little pebble at a time, and eventually becomes an avalanche. And I think avalanches with insanity are inevitable, so yeah.
And to add to that must be our thoughts, our progress in identifying what we're for. It's very easy to be clear about what we're against and complain about what we're against, but I think we must put energy into identifying what we're for, what kind of world we want to live in, what kind of world is realistic. I mean, let's not do a drugs thing and just be out of our heads. It's easy enough. But what are we for? What kind of world do we want to create, to live in? What do we want our children, our friends, our grandchildren in my case? What kind of world do I want them to? This is what I think we must focus on. Not just what negative things have been done, are being done, but what world we want, and then help build that world. And if that means that a lot of men will come with us, that's fine. But if they don't want to, then I think they will enjoy the the benefits of their endeavours.
I think we're trending toward a critical mass of women especially resisting. I feel like it's growing. Maybe that's just my own optimism and the fact that I pretty much surround myself with intelligent women and women who are honest and brave. So I don't know what's going on outside of that circle, but I feel like, especially watching what's happening in the UK, to be quite honest, is so inspiring, and women are really pushing back, and it seems like more people are saying enough is enough.
Indeed.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. I really, really appreciate you being part of the beginning of our discussion. And I'm hoping that we can open things up to everyone else.
Yeah, I have two questions. One is, within our own beautiful community, it seems like we're always infighting, whether it's vegetarians versus carnivores, or mothers versus single women, or people who feel like the best strategy is working only within radical feminism, or people who think that it's necessary to work with other groups. What goes through your head when you maybe don't agree with another lesbian, but you're like, we're still lesbians, how do we reconcile this and keep working together?
Some of it is like, okay, how important is this going to be in 24 hours? How important is this going to be in a week? How important is this going to be in a month, in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years? And if I'm getting out to like 6 months and it's really not going to be that important, or a year or 2 years and it's not going to be that important, then it's like, why even say anything about it? There's going to be very few things that are going to be critically important and make huge differences in the world in 10 years. And, if I can figure out what those are, then I can talk about them. And some of it also is, gray rock. There's people that do things that I think are like, it's screwed up, but, it's what she's into and it's fine. And it's just, and if a woman comes at me and starts, it's like, interesting weather today, and I'm just not going to get into it, and I keep my ego out of it, and just like, it's like, fine, do what you want.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're talking mostly about putting things into kind of a longer perspective.
Yeah, and just, it's people have like, crazy feelings about everything all the time, but how you feel is not how you are. And that includes me. So, unless there's something that is going to do imminent damage to somebody, or that's going to make, clearly going to make a critical difference over the long term for massive numbers of people, I don't bother with it. I mean, my thing is triage for the world, the greatest good for the greatest number, and that's how I make a lot of decisions.
While you were out, the discussion was opened, and Casey asked a question for the group. And Casey, do you want to re-ask it so that she knows what the question was?
Thank you.
When there's infighting and disagreements within the lesbian community, how do you move past that and remind yourself that at the end of the day that we're on the same team?
I think we just have to put aside our egos and to remember some of the principles. Certainly in Britain, we had demands of the women's liberation movement. I think these days we'd probably not call them demands, but and besides which we've achieved most of them. But putting aside ego, thinking about the greatest good, and thinking about realistic timelines as well. We may have to start something now, and it may not reach its point, its purpose, its desired outcomes for 10 years, but we have to start it now. Expecting that what we do today is going to cause the world to be a better place tomorrow may be unrealistic. We have to be realistic about what is possible, and then put our energy and support of other women to make the thing happen. But we've certainly in Britain post Thatcher, where there's individualism essentially, in which we're just competing with each other, and men are as a class are competing with women, continuing to compete with women. I think we need to be realistic and to be what's the word? I'm trying to think of the word. Include other women. It's not just about us. It's not just about what we can do. It is about what we as a community can do. And when we can't do something, to not beat ourselves up, but to recognise we are human and that there are limitations. And I think that women have been socialised to be very good about being guilty. And I think we should throw guilt aside. It helps nobody. Let us take responsibility for that which is within our power, rather than feel guilty. And then we find we can't do anything. So it's less than we were before. So that's what I recommend, that we take responsibility, that we're realistic, and we do with that which is within our power. And sometimes that means working with others and being less powerful, because it will achieve the greater good.
I think that something that's worked the best for me is recognizing when there are certain women that I can ally with on just certain issues. I mean, I think all of the women here understand that, you know, there are certain times where we're allying with people that we mostly might disagree with on probably most other issues in our lives, but that, you know, and so there are radical feminists who I feel like I probably align with on, you know, most issues, but that, you know, there might be sometimes where it doesn't make sense for me to organize with certain women because maybe we just have to agree to disagree on certain tactics or strategies. And I think that that's a really important thing to take into account, just, you know, not necessarily go along to get along, but just that they're going to have separate groups and separate experiences that might not be for me.
Okay. And my second question for all of you is, what is your favorite part about being a lesbian?
The sex.
Women.
Duh. Fucking duh.
Women.
Sorry, I'll try to be cool.
Could I answer that?
Oh, I think everyone
She said
can
it's my
answer.
own.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
open.
For me, being a lesbian is creating a world that doesn't need men, that isn't defined by men, where we can be ourselves in a very new way, possibly, we can throw away the old definitions, the old ways of doing things. The sex is, it's great, but there is more to life.
There is.
I'm just a lesbian with every fibre of my being, and I can't imagine being anything else. So the best thing about being a lesbian is being me, and it's being in the world as me, not compromising, not hiding, and having the strength to do that because I've got all the other lesbians behind me.
The deepest connections possible, emotionally, spiritually, physically, the deepest connections possible in the world.
I also wanted to mention that anybody who isn't part of the panel, if you would like, before you answer a question or before you ask a question to the rest of the group, please feel free to introduce yourself or not, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
I had one. Linda Bellos. I have a situation in Canada where one of the biggest impediments to this trans involvement in sport is actually a group of women called the Canadian Association for the Advancement of Women in Sports, and they're lesbian and feminists, and yet they're the ones that are going across the country really. It's almost like the government tasked that group of women to kind of preach the gospel of transgenderism to the sport groups. And I was really shocked when I went to AGM, I guess in December last year, that it was a group of women trying to convince us that this was what we should do in sport and welcome men into our sports. And I just was so shocked. And I'm not saying like it's all lesbians are doing that or whatever, but is there any, I guess my question is there a strategy that, because it's a pretty prominent group in Canadian sport, and they're recognized as like the representatives of the women's athletes, and yet I don't know that, like, they're not doing us any favors by promoting what we were here today to protest against. Is there some strategy you can recommend, or is there or maybe just enlighten me as to what are the factions within the lesbian community that whereby one faction is doing that and another faction is doing what you guys were doing today, which I found amazing.
That, it seems to me, that's about politics.
Is it?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't mean your politics. I mean the politics of those. It happens in a number of communities. I can think about sections of the black community in which they have been beneficiaries of being, I'm going to use a ghastly expression, arse lickers.
Okay. Yeah.
And that they want is to maintain their superior statement by doing everything that the boss wants and expects them to do. What to do? I know what I want to do, but it's not legal. I'm not sure what, except that you and your colleagues be clear and resolute, notwithstanding the strength that they and the power that they clearly exercise, but they will be explored. They will be exposed, and you might play a part in their exposure in some way, and that would be to do with the media. There may be stories. I'm not talking about
It's probably
advice.
funding too, right? You think there's funding involved there? Like, do they get a lot of funding?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, somebody could be looking to see whether there's any. I mean, it's, you will have radical newspapers and journalists who would be interested in that story.
Really?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know who they are, but
But there is a problem in that though, because yes, this group should be exposed and they should be disarmed.
Right.
But we don't want to drag down
I
the
don't wanna
notion
be
of
so hard on them.
lesbians.
I don't want to be hard on them. Like, then it's just the men saying, "Well, it's just a cat fight between women."
Yeah.
And I don't want to keep calling them out. I tried to avoid on Twitter @ing them. I allude to it a lot, that they're the ones pushing it, but I don't actually invoke. I've invoked the organization maybe twice in like a year and a half on like something like shame on this group for not sticking up for the women, but I try not to go after them every single time because I want them to see it and I want them to self-correct. You'd think within their organization they would start asking questions.
What's the name of the organization?
It's Canadian Association for the Advancement of Women in Sport. It's CAWS. CAAWS. CAWS. Canadian Association. And they put themselves out there as the representatives of women in sport in Canada.
Oh, well, what about questions of democracy? The how?
Yeah.
Just go.
I guess maybe we don't have enough people on their board. You
Yeah.
know, like maybe it's just been taken over by a group of people that have a stake.
So
I don't
you might
know.
have to use similar, well, not similar, but means by which their group is more representative, because you can turn people up to the where the
board.
votes are, to vote meetings where new members are.
Yeah.
That is a way, and it's a legitimate way. So there's nothing
Yeah.
underhand about that.
Yeah.
If they can do it, you can do it.
Right.
About getting the people you want, and yours will be, as it were, I don't want to use the word straight, but something.
No, but just a legitimate way.
Yeah, exactly. Legitimate representatives
Right.
of the best interests of women.
Yeah, I think some of them, I think in their hearts they know I have a feeling that within their group there's people who know
Who
that
could
they
be
made the
turned.
wrong call.
Yeah, they could be turned there.
And yeah,
There's probably a lot of fear there,
yeah.
I imagine.
I mean, essentially they're collaborators, and collaborators collaborate because they think they're gonna get a better deal
Okay.
by collaborating.
Yeah.
So find women who've realized that they didn't get a better deal and what it was that made them realize, oh, this is, and then, you know,
Yeah.
whatever it was that made them realize, and maybe work with that.
We have, this is this is Natasha chart. We have a lot of situations like that in the US here where, you know, for instance, all the domestic violence shelters, all of the emergency shelters
yeah.
for women. As soon as the Obama administration tied federal funding for any work like that to accepting anyone on the basis of gender identity, there was simply no hope that any of them were going to speak out.
Right.
And, you know, a lot of those organizations have put their names on some very harmful statements about, oh, well, you know, it's no problem if we end public accommodations for women. And it frustrates me, and I don't, like, they've made a decision. The way I think about it is like, we can't help any women if we just lose everything.
Right.
If we just get defunded and have to close down. And so there are probably a lot of people in these organizations, I would imagine, who are not necessarily happy with it, but they can't, within their position, do anything about it. And one thing that I hope that we can achieve someday, and it's not going to be today, and it may not be tomorrow, and I don't know how long it's going to take, but to create enough cover where they can start speaking out. And to not think like they're not my primary, you know, they're not the reason, this wasn't their decision. They're just trying to do kind of the best that they can. I don't know if that's the situation in that case, but, you know, just try to create cover for them until they can come out.
And I sense there's this, I was talking to an athlete who's been a longtime national team member. I'm not gonna say her name, but she's lesbian. She's definitely outspoken, but when we started talking about the trans issue, I mean, she almost felt like, I felt like she was struggling with an allegiance to LGBTQ versus just looking at the idea of women's sport. I don't know, is that a tough one to break? Like, is there,
Well,
do you think?
It may be the only community she has, and she
Yeah.
will lose her entire
Yeah.
friend group
Yeah.
if she betrays it.
Okay.
And not only lose her friend group, but be seriously harassed and reviled.
Yeah, So then that, even
Or
the
even
strongest,
lose- or
and
even
she's
lose a
strong.
job.
She's very strong. So for the strongest woman that I know, one of the strongest ones to feel that way,
Yeah.
shows me that how powerful it is
Mm.
that you associate or identify with the, you know, with the rainbow flag or whatever, right?
But we need to show young women, as I was saying today, that there's community that exists and they can be part of this community. I mean, all of us here are community.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we keep on communicating that to these younger women, to this younger generation, that you can speak out, and that, you know, you might even lose a lot or even all of your friends, but there are lots of women who will be there to catch you. And, you know, that's something that I personally found in my own life, you know, because I get to be here with all of you.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's good. Thank you.
What I tell women is that the GBT is men, and they're always going to vote in favor of men. They're not on women's side, period. The L should get out, and I think in England the L is getting out.
But in fact, Stonewall, I mean, I've been telling various people, and I kind of think, oh, perhaps I should
I'm sorry to interrupt
fact
you,
check.
but can
Yeah.
you,
Sorry.
can you mention what Stonewall is? To
Yeah,
anyone
yeah, I
who's-
was going to,
Oh,
I was
okay.
going to, yeah. So Stonewall is the organisation in England that's been going for 50 years, I think.
No, less than that.
Oh, is it? Okay.
the real
which
Stonewall was
supports?
50 years
Oh, yeah,
ago.
yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. So they've taken their name from the Stonewall pub, which was bombed 50
No,
years.
1969.
1969. So the Stonewall is an organisation in England that supports LBG.
LGBT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they a number of years ago took on tea, but they're realising now that actually transgender has nothing to do with sexuality, that it shouldn't be in the same organisation.
Right.
So it will now, Stonewall will be LGB, period.
Is that the thing now for sure, for real? Like, that's
They want
not,
to create
Well, yeah,
something called the LGB Alliance.
Oh,
really?
That's an alternative.
so that's
to
an alternative to the
Because
LGBT.
LGB are like who you're attracted to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Biological.
Like
Yeah.
heterosexual or
Yeah.
LGBT.
Bisexual.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to trans it's an identity thing. It doesn't really belong in the LGB
It's not a
umbrella.
sexuality.
No.
Right,
It's,
it's not
it's
sexual.
related gender.
Exactly.
So you're saying maybe like in 5 years or so, that LGBTQ might not even be necessarily a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the L could
Yeah.
be separated.
We should
If it's
be
within our
encouraging.
power,
Yeah.
I hope
if it's within
so.
our power,
I
it will
hope so.
it would be
Yeah.
just a thing.
If we get beyond the point of this total polarisation and I mean it is hatred.
Yeah.
You know, the two groups, you're either pro or
Right.
you're against trans.
Right.
Which, you know, I mean it's got to come to a point where trans people they organise as transgender people.
Right.
And we've got to find a way of encouraging them to put their energy into organising with each other instead of fighting lesbian feminists.
I think we had another question or comment over here.
Yeah, what I'm seeing here, kind of from the 30,000 foot perspective, is that you have sexuality and then you have back to ideology.
Yeah.
And that these two groups have been lumped together for a common cause, but now you're seeing that that's not
We never
working.
had a common cause in the first
And
place.
that once again, the ideology is sectioning off versus, so you've got sexuality, biology, ideology.
But then the attack of the media on our, like, what we're saying in terms of, like, I have to go back to sport because that's what I know, but I mean, it's like especially in the CBC, you know, like it's like the BBC, like, oh, you're anti-LGBTQ. No, maybe one part of LGBTQ, but we're trying to just be fair. But like it's like it's not even within the community per se, but it's like what you're telling me is you've almost moved on to beyond you're one big family.
Mm-hmm.
But then we are being told all the time, no, you can't go against this group, like as if it's just like one monolithic entity. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's correct, that's the perception that is endorsed.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And that group is anti-woman.
Yeah, well, that's
It
what's
is.
so shocking to me, I guess. I always assumed they were.
That's why there are movements now to take
Split.
the LGB out, or in particular for the L was
Right.
probably the worst off in that whole alphabet soup, is to just like leave, and
Interesting.
to promote change by abandoning ship.
I think we had Kara over
Yeah.
here.
I did have a question, but it's on a slightly different topic,
Yeah.
so if we want to
No, I'm
continue.
finished. I just wanted to really find out what the deal was with that whole conglomeration and whether it's there or not there.
I'm glad we could all discuss that and just kind of illuminate a little bit
Yeah,
more about
yeah.
what all of our outs have a lot of different thoughts about it. So thank you.
Okay.
I mean, I would just also express, I think it is hugely problematic that the left-leaning media continually refers in the United States, and I think too in Canada and in the
In the
UK,
UK.
to the LGBTQ in the same way that conservatives refer to school curriculums as
Yes.
being opposed to SOGI or SOGI
yeah,
or
yeah,
SOGI or whatever
yeah.
they call it, but they always lump SO in
Uh-huh.
with GI.
Okay, yeah.
And just for our viewers who might not know what that means,
Sexual orientation and gender identity, and those are very different things.
Yes.
Right.
And it's deeply problematic that the schools are pushing the notion that there is such a thing as sexual orientation and gender identity.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're not allowed to go against any of it.
Right.
Well, you can't go again. You can't question. If you question one, then you're
Yeah,
apparently
that's-
questioning all.
Apparently, then you're a bigot towards all.
Yeah.
yeah.
Which is what a lot of people were shouting about today.
That's right.
which
Yeah.
obviously doesn't make sense as many of us are lesbians. And
Yeah.
so for people to be shouting at us that we're homophobic
Yeah.
just seems on its face
Yeah, that was pretty
ridiculous.
So could I follow? Would it be okay to follow up with my question?
Oh, yes,
It's a
please,
little
I'm
bit
sorry.
unrelated. No, it's very related to what you just said, Corrina, which is that today at the rally, women were being represented by two straight women, one of them being myself on the left, and Doreen, a straight woman, on the right. And I have a question. If any of you care to, if any lesbian in the room wants to respond, to what extent do you feel comfortable with that? To what extent do lesbians need straight women to step down? To what extent do lesbians need straight women to represent more effectively? What can straight women be doing in leadership positions in our collective movement to be better sisters?
I'm not convinced that stepping down is. It depends what the elected body is and what it's meant to represent. But I don't think I for one wouldn't necessarily expect straight women to step down. I would expect straight women to be consulting with all of the groups that they're representing. That's fair and reasonable. A particular reason for reticence is that the body that you work with may be just as capable of getting somebody who's, for example, trans. So we'd be worse off than having you there. Does that make any sense? It does to me.
Like somebody like you're saying, a trans person could be leading.
Well, they could be put in a position where
Oh, I see.
they could be put in a position where they are doing that. Given this, the main thing is surely the complete confusion that is in the minds of the bodies who are wanting to be inclusive but know nothing about either the legislation, the history, anything. They don't know anything about it, and they need to know. And frankly, I have an interest here because I used to train organisations on equality law, what it meant to them. I haven't done it partly because in England the first thing that happened when the Tories got into power was they got rid of any advice. So they make it up as they go along, and there's nobody to kind of hold them. I used to hold them to account, and so did others, but we're doing other things. Anyway.
Straight women, I want them to be truth tellers. where they can. I want them when some other straight woman says that a lesbian in a locker room is the same as a man in a locker room, to dispatch that like very, very strongly and universally, and to just be truth tellers.
I feel in the context of today that it was fine because we were talking about all women and all girls, and obviously I do have an interest in the effects of the trans activists on lesbians because, for example, the Gender Dysphoria Clinic in London, at the Tavistock Clinic, has recorded that the rate of referral of young women to their service has increased in 4,000-fold. So this is young women who, such as Linda and I, and probably Marian, who as young women, as teenagers, didn't want to have dresses and dolls and climb trees and all the rest of it, play football. So, we were able to grow up and be lesbians. These young women are being told if they won't accept that, they must be a man. Yeah. So go and get the hormone blockers, go and get your breasts cut off. And it's such a crime, I just can't, I can't bear it really.
It really is.
So, straight women have a very important part to play in representing all women, but within that, as lesbians, we have to speak up about what it's doing to lesbians. It's erasing the existence of lesbians. You've got transgender men who still have their tackle, who are putting pressure on young lesbians to have sex with them, because if they don't, they're transphobic. Yeah. So, there are aspects of the anti-trans movement which maybe straight women can't actually represent. So, lesbians, we have to be up there and be vocal as well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I think it's time for us to kind of wrap up now, but everybody who participated and everyone who's here, I just really appreciate you, so I just want to give everybody a little round of applause. Thank you. And thank you to our viewers for watching.